Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material, your notes, your research, and distill it down to the most essential and often surprising truths.
We're here to give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And today, we have a life story that I think everyone needs to hear it, especially if you ever had that thought, that nagging feeling of, well, I guess I missed my chance.
It's more than just a life story, though.
Yeah.
It's almost a foundational American narrative. We're looking at decades of hard, necessary physical labor,
Right.
followed by decades of just unexpected, world-changing creative success. It's a living, breathing refutation of the concept of the finish line.
Exactly. Our deep dive today is into the remarkable life and the utterly improbable late-blooming career of Mary Robertson Moses.
Known to the world, of course, as Grandma Moses.
Globally, affectionately,
Yeah.
and very, very commercially. The sheer tenacity, this unexpected timeline, and the depth of her artistic output, all of it starting when most people are already well into retirement.
Yeah.
That's what makes this material so intensely compelling.
And the core fact, the thing that really anchors this entire discussion, is this incredible timeline. Mary Robertson Moses became a prolific, financially successful, and globally merchandised artist who began painting in earnest. Not in her 20s, not even in her middle age, but at the astonishing age of 78.
78. And you really have to understand, this wasn't just some brief, charming flurry of late-life activity. She did not stop there.
Not even close.
She continued to paint, to produce critically acclaimed work, and even evolve her style, almost until her death at 101.
So our mission today is precisely that, to unpack the specific, granular details of that journey. We want to understand how a life of, frankly, exhausting labor set the stage for one of the great American creative careers.
And ultimately to prove, using both historical evidence and even some scientific insight, that profound professional growth and, real fulfillment can happen at any stage of life.
It's the ultimate inspiration, isn't it? For anyone who harbors an untapped passion or a deferred dream. It just reminds us that all that knowledge and skill you acquire through decades of lived experience, it can be profoundly valuable.
And widely celebrated. And maybe it only truly comes to fruition when the timing is right for you.
A critical part of her story is that context. She didn't skip the hard work, she delayed the medium. The material really shows that her resourcefulness, her eye for detail, her deep understanding of community life, all of that was forged long, long before she ever opened a paint tube.
Okay, let's unpack this. A life story that challenges every assumption we have about when the chance for greatness or even just deep personal satisfaction runs out. So to truly appreciate the momentous shift that happened when she picked up a paintbrush at 78, we have to first understand the 7+ decades that came before it.
Right.
So section 1 is all about setting that crucial context, a life of labor and latent passion from 1860 to 1937.
She was born Anna Mary Robertson in 1860. She was the third of 10 children in Greenwich, New York. And her early life was the quintessential definition of 19th century rural industriousness.
Wasn't just farm life, was it? Her father was a farmer, yes, but he also ran a flax mill.
Exactly. So this was an environment where work was constant, it was essential, and it was varied. There was always something to be done.
And this wasn't a childhood that offered the luxury of time for, formal art lessons or endless leisure. The necessity of labor was absolutely paramount.
And at age 12, just think about that for a second, a 12-year-old child, she left her family home to begin working as a live-in housekeeper for wealthy families.
Wow.
And this was a continuous, demanding job she held for 15 straight years. Her working life began in earnest before she was even a teenager.
That kind of sustained, domestic and physical labor. That forms the core identity of the person we later know as Grandma Moses.
It absolutely does. It built her resilience, her sense of purpose, and her profound appreciation for the material world all around her.
Yet even within all that intense labor, that innate artistic instinct was already struggling to express itself. And the sources have these fascinating details about her. Well, her incredibly resourceful early attempts at art.
Yes, these anecdotes are so charming, but they're also deeply insightful into her core creativity. She couldn't afford proper materials, so she used the raw ingredients of the farm to create her first landscapes.
Right, I saw this. She describes using lemon and grape juice for colors.
Lemon and grape juice, along with ground ochre, grass, flour paste, slaked lime, and even sawdust for texture and binding.
Sawdust. I mean, imagine the level of practical innovation required to turn kitchen supplies and, garden materials into art supplies.
The sources even mention she affectionately called these creations landscapes sometimes, which is a very early hint of the pastoral subject matter that would later make her so famous.
And that innate talent didn't go completely unnoticed, which I think is a really key detail here.
It is. One of her employers, the Whitesides family, they recognized her appreciation for the detailed scenes in their Currier and Ives prints.
Ah, those hugely popular lithographs depicting idyllic American life.
Exactly. And they responded beautifully. They went out and they bought her actual drawing materials, chalk and wax crayons.
It's such a fleeting moment of encouragement, but it proves the spark was there, it was acknowledged, and it was momentarily fueled, even if the relentless demands of adult farm life soon meant setting that passion aside.
That spark had to be put on the back burner for the pragmatic realities of survival and building a family. In 1887, at age 27, she married Thomas Salmon Moses, who was a hired man on the same farm.
And their life was one of constant, physically grueling work. They spent, nearly 2 decades working and moving through 5 different farms in Virginia.
5 farms, yes, before eventually settling on their first owned residence, which was called Mount Airy.
The sources really emphasize her extraordinary resilience and her business acumen during this foundational period.
Oh, absolutely. She understood that just farming wasn't enough to secure their future, so to supplement their income, she didn't just passively manage the house.
No, she actively created and sold products. She was known for making and selling both high-quality butter and potato chips.
That detail about the potato chips is so important. It speaks to her resourcefulness and her ability to identify a market opportunity and then fulfill it through diligent, hands-on production.
She sounds like an entrepreneur.
She was. She was famously a very strong woman, both physically and mentally, who firmly believed that women should never depend entirely on a man for support. Her work ethic it defined her.
And her personal life was also marked by immense tragedy alongside that resilience.
It was. She had 10 children over the years, and heartbreakingly, only 5 of them survived infancy.
That constant cycle of life and loss, of hope and hardship, it undoubtedly shaped the deeply nostalgic and positive worldview she later put onto her canvases.
In 1905, they moved back north to Eagle Bridge, New York, where they bought a farm and settled. And life continued on that industrious path until the death of her husband, Thomas, in 1927.
And by 1936, at age 76, she was finally retiring from the most demanding parts of farm work, and she moved into her daughter's home.
This shift is just crucial. She had spent a lifetime proving her immense capacity for work and creation, but the environment was always focused on utility food, fabric, shelter.
Right. Now, finally, she had a reduction in those physical labor demands and an increase in discretionary time.
And before painting became her profession, her creative energy was channeled into what the sources call decorative or fiber arts. We know of one of her earliest surviving painted works, which was a decorated fireboard from around 1918, where she used simple house paint.
And then, importantly, came the full-blown hobby art phase. Starting around 1932, at age 72, she turned her attention to yarn.
Yes, she began embroidering pictures, she created quilted objects and these detailed scenes for friends and family. This was her primary creative outlet just before that miraculous shift to oil on canvas.
And this hobby art phase, it offers such a powerful connection to her later technique.
It really does. The art historian Lucy R. Lippard, who often wrote about undervalued domestic crafts, she noted that hobby art was typically ranked below folk art in the critical hierarchy. It was often dismissed as just, domestic effort.
But for Moses, this was key. Her sense of accomplishment was rooted in her practical, lifelong ability to make something from nothing.
Exactly. Whether it was generating income from homemade potato chips or making beautiful images from simple yarn and scraps of fabric.
So this deeply ingrained resourcefulness, homed over 8 decades of necessity, transferred directly into her late-life art career.
And this is the central point for you to take away. She was not a blank slate at 78. She was a master technician and a resourceful creator whose experience was simply waiting for the optimal medium. Her hands were already trained in precision and patterning, just through fiber instead of pigment.
It sets up the narrative so beautifully. She wasn't suddenly pulled off the farm and handed a brush. She was a creator already, someone who had solved material problems her entire life. The ultimate act of resourcefulness, becoming a famous painter, was just the final logical step in her long, industrious life.
Which takes us directly into Section 2.
The spark at 78. From embroidery to canvas. We now have to address the catalyst for this monumental career change, and what the sources reveal is just wonderfully, almost comically practical.
It really is. It was a simple shift prompted entirely by physical necessity, which is the delightful irony of her origin story. Around age 76, the persistent, repetitive motion of embroidering with yarn became painful for her.
Arthritis.
Arthritis, yes. Her hands were giving out, but her desire to create was not. Her sister, Celestia, recognizing the challenge, was the one who suggested painting instead.
Correctly identifying it as an easier, less physically demanding medium for her aching hands and joints.
We also have these marvelous humanizing details that reinforce her pragmatic nature. The sources tell us she had another practical reason for making the switch.
Right, the Christmas gift for the postman.
Yes. She noted that it was easier to make a painting than to bake a cake over a hot stove.
It's amazing. The first painting wasn't some spiritual revelation. It was a way to efficiently fulfill a social obligation without overheating the kitchen. That sense of efficiency never left her.
And perhaps most pragmatically for an artist focused on permanence, she realized that painted works would last significantly longer than her worsted wool embroidery, which, risked being destroyed by moth.
So the move was essentially about durability and practicality, not about entering the hallowed halls of high art.
Not at all. But out of that incredible pragmatism came one of the most highly serendipitous moments in 20th century art history.
The moment of her accidental discovery in 1938.
The scene reads like something out of a film script. Louis J. Caldor, a sophisticated New York City engineer and an art collector, was driving through the small, unassuming town of Hoosick Falls, New York.
And he noticed something unusual.
He spotted 4 small, vibrant paintings by Moses displayed not in a gallery, but in the window of a local drugstore.
And this is the part that just highlights that thin line between total obscurity and fame. The sources say these paintings had been sitting there, gathering dust, completely unsold, for about a year.
A whole year. Imagine walking past a future million-dollar masterpiece just sitting there next to the aspirin and the cough drops.
It's incredible.
But Caldor, who was clearly a man with an exceptional eye for raw, untaught genius, recognized the powerful originality immediately. He didn't hesitate. He bought the supply from the drugstore.
And then he went further.
He did. He drove directly to her farm in Eagle Bridge and purchased 10 more works for a pittance, just $3 to $5 each.
$3 to $5. And the collector, Louis Caldor, was so convinced of her talent that he immediately assured the surprised 77-year-old widow and her relatives that he was going to make her famous.
It wasn't just a purchase, it was a prophecy delivered in a farmhouse kitchen.
The magnitude of this sudden shift just cannot be overstated. She had just retired and moved into her daughter's home 2 years earlier, embracing a life of domestic calm.
And now, international celebrity was on the horizon. It just proves that a second, entirely unexpected, high-velocity professional life is absolutely possible, even in your late 70s.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The ascent was so rapid and intense, and it defied all the norms of the academic art establishment. In 1939, just a year later, Caldor successfully maneuvered 3 of her paintings into a major Museum of Modern Art MoMA exhibition in New York.
And the title of that exhibition is crucial to understanding her initial position. It was called Contemporary Unknown American Painters.
So she was introduced to the elite art world, specifically as an outsider, an unknown, someone operating completely outside the system.
Her formal solo debut followed swiftly. In 1940, she had her first major show titled What a Farm Wife Painted at Otto Keller's Gallery St. Etienne in New York.
And Collier quickly became her dealer, her primary champion, and her tireless promoter.
Collier really understood the times. It was the tail end of the Great Depression. Global conflict was looming. He recognized that the public was deeply hungry for art that expressed hope, simplicity, and an affirmative outlook on American life.
And Moses's work arrived at precisely the cultural moment when it was needed most.
Absolutely. And the nickname that cemented her place in public consciousness arrived almost instantly. A reviewer for the New York Herald Tribune covering that first solo show was the first to call her Grandma Moses.
And it stuck.
It stuck instantly, and soon, Grandma Moses was one of the most recognized names in America, an omnipresent cultural figure.
We have to analyze the duality of that nickname, though. The sources suggest that while it contributed massively to her fame and created that recognizable, comforting persona, It also served to categorize her.
It did. It was initially seen by some critics as somewhat belittling. It sort of sidelined her from the serious academic art world and maybe reduced her to a quaint novelty.
It put her into a box. The quaint, self-taught folk artist box. It's a convenient label the mainstream art establishment often uses to minimize the impact of true, untrained talent.
But she transcended the label. She embraced the identity to the extent that she knew it spoke to millions of people who related to her background, whether they were housewives or widows, or just people who felt their own creative life had been put on hold.
The sources show the speed of her cultural penetration was just immense. She went from being an unknown farm wife to being name-dropped in popular culture. I think she's mentioned in the classic 1945 film Adam's Rib.
That's right. Her name became synonymous with wholesome, genuine American values, all within just a few short years of picking up a brush.
That kind of staggering velocity, for someone who began their profession at 78, is the entire argument for this deep dive.
It is. If the underlying talent, the life experience, and the message are strong enough, professional momentum can begin at any time, even when conventional wisdom dictates that you should be slowing down. Her story just demolishes the myth of the expiration date on creativity.
Now we move into Section 3, which is dedicated to analyzing the work itself, the art of the people, style, optimism, and meaning.
Okay.
Since she lacked formal academic training, having spent those formative years in the field and the kitchen, not the studio, her work had to be categorized differently by the art world.
Yes, and the categories applied are folk or naive art. These labels are typically applied to adult non-academic artists, those recognized as outsiders by the formal system.
Right.
And critically, the sources point out that folk artists thrive on absolute creative freedom. They set their own limits, they invent their own rules, precisely because their learning takes place outside the rigid structure of the official academic system.
There's a really interesting philosophical argument in the source material that suggests her art should be called primitive rather than just folk. And this is a term that often confuses the modern listener.
It needs unpacking for sure, because in this context, primitive is not derogatory at all. It's a high compliment.
Right.
The source argues that this art is intuitive. It springs directly from the heart, unburdened by theory. It possesses the emotional freshness of children's art and the deep symbolic mystery often associated with tribal art.
So the idea is the untaught art, or primitivism, is the original state of all art. It's accessible and untaught, available to every human being, regardless of their formal education. It strips away the layers of academic pretense.
Exactly. And the core message embedded in this intuitive, primitive style is simple, direct communication. Her work was intended to make viewers see the world poetically, to share fun and joy and a positive memory of the American past.
And this unbridled optimism. The source posits that it was so powerful and so fundamentally affirmative that it was seen, almost ironically, as a real threat to any system that is based on intimidation and control.
It's a powerful idea.
It is. Art that is pure, simple, and happy challenges cynicism. It invites the viewer into a world of happiness and community love, where there is neither an elite gatekeeper nor brutal competition. It offers a dream of simple, attainable fulfillment.
And this philosophy just perfectly aligns with the enduring spirit she cultivated over a lifetime of hard work.
Now let's talk about the subject matter, because this is what truly defined her signature style and her cultural impact.
She painted what she knew, old-timey rural New England landscapes, capturing these vivid scenes from her earlier days, haying, sugaring off, sleigh rides, community events like quilting bees.
She was a documentarian of a bygone era, and her choice of subject was highly intentional.
Oh, very. She deliberately omitted features of modern life. The sources specify she avoided tractors and telephone poles, focusing purely on the past to show how we used to live.
She actually described her process, didn't she? Saying when she was painting, she would forget everything. Everything except how things used to be and how to paint it so people will know how we used to live.
It wasn't merely nostalgia, it was an act of preservation through pigment.
And this focus on the idealized past is precisely why her art became such a defining element of American culture, particularly in the mid-20th century. Her scenes portrayed the pioneer spirit, the independence, and the inventiveness that constituted the foundational vision of the American dream.
The sources cite other folk artists who captured the same spirit, like John Keane's Prosperity's Increase, which also celebrated progress, homeownership, and the moral rectitude of the working life. Moses fit perfectly into that lineage, offering comfort and a sense of enduring stability during a very volatile time.
But the truly fascinating part for me is how her style itself, bears the undeniable marks of her 8 decades of preparation. Specifically, her earlier career in domestic labor and decorative arts like embroidery. You
Yes.
look at the technical specifics, the needlework influence is everywhere.
It's a masterclass in adaptation. She certainly lacked academic perspective, which is the learned technique for creating the illusion of depth and distance on a two-dimensional surface.
Where objects get smaller and fainter as they move toward the horizon.
Right. Moses rejected that.
So instead of that linear perspective, she used what we call multi-field composition. She created depth using bright, distinct, multicolored fields stacked one behind the other.
Which gives the viewer the distinct impression of looking onto a detailed stage of action from a slightly elevated place, like you're in the first balcony in a theater.
I love that analogy. And everything on that stage is equally clear, right? It defies the rules of diminishing scale and atmospheric haze.
Every tiny figure, every building, every fence post is sharply defined. This is not a lack of skill. It's a structural choice that allows her to pack the maximum amount of narrative and detail into the canvas.
And her use of color is especially telling of her practical origins. Her colors were bright, reflecting her lifelong love for nature, and she used them in pure, unblended tones.
Which reflects the necessity of maximizing the limited resources she likely had access to when she first started painting.
Right. And crucially, her love for heavy texture and pattern, which is so recognizable from needlework and quilting, that dictated her painting technique.
She did not blend colors smoothly. Instead, she laid small, distinct strokes next to one another to create a color gradient or a shimmering effect.
So when you look closely at a Moses painting, those small strokes are visually mimicking the stitching of two different colored threads close together on a canvas.
Exactly. The texture, the pattern, the reliance on distinct, unblended color. It all links back directly to the skills she honed with yarn, not oil paints. She didn't learn to paint so much as she simply applied her knowledge of fiber arts to a new medium.
And what's perhaps most inspiring is that she never stopped learning, even in her 90s.
No, she didn't. Around age 96, she admitted, "I'm changing my style, getting modern in my old age."
That phrase alone just speaks volumes about her continuous professional learning curve. Her late style became more abstract, more painterly, and significantly less linear.
Her figures were reduced to expressive symbols, and her signature highly textured trees became these blobs of rich, loose paint.
And this was likely influenced by the physical realities of her great age, the unsteady hands, which forced her to loosen up and paint more broadly.
Yet instead of seeing this adaptation as a decline, critics recognize it as a move toward a new, abstract expressionism. Even at 96, she was innovating and adapting to physical changes, continuing the process of creative growth.
She remained a consummate professional right up to the very end, proving that mastery, evolution, and innovation are not the sole domain of the young or middle-aged. The depth and maturity of her late work, coupled with that enduring childlike freshness, make for a highly complex and immensely valuable legacy that just transcends that quaint grandma label.
It really does.
Which brings us to Section 4, and her unprecedented success. A good day's work, acclaim, and timeless legacy. Let's just quantify the achievement of this world-famous late bloomer.
Okay, well, the output alone is a testament to her work ethic. She painted more than 1,500 canvases in the 3 decades after she began painting seriously at 78.
1,500. That is phenomenal productivity for any artist, let alone one navigating the challenges of her 80s, 90s, and her 100th year.
And the financial trajectory is the clearest possible measure of her public recognition and cultural impact. She started, as we said, by selling those paintings for a handful of dollars.
$3 to $5 each.
Right. Later in her career, her works were commanding prices of $8,000 to $10,000, which was an astronomical sum at the time for a living artist, especially a self-taught one.
And we can't forget the auction results that placed her firmly in the high echelon of American art valuation. Her 1943 painting, Sugaring Off, sold for $1.36 million in 2006.
This is no mere novelty. This is serious, recognized artistic value.
And she rapidly transcended the art world. She became a full-fledged media icon. The scale of her fame was enormous. In 1953, she was deemed culturally significant enough to appear on the cover of Time magazine. She was 93 years old.
She even crossed the threshold into the then-nascent world of television. She was interviewed by the legendary broadcast journalist Edward R. Murrow on his celebrated program See It Now in 1955.
When she was 95. And that interview contained one of the most famous anecdotes about her enduring drive. Murrow, perhaps looking for some philosophical conclusion, asked her what she had planned for the next 20 years.
And she famously pointed skyward and said, "I'm going up yonder," before immediately reaching for a paintbrush, signaling that until that final moment, her work was not finished.
Her honors were extensive, bridging the worlds of art, commerce, and civic life. She received Women's National Press Club Trophy for Outstanding Accomplishment in Art in 1949.
And two separate honorary doctoral degrees, one from Russell Sage College and another from Moore College of Art and Design.
And the public outpouring of affection was just massive. An Oscar-nominated documentary about her life was made in 1950.
And perhaps most touchingly, her 100th birthday in 1960 was officially proclaimed Grandma Moses Day by New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller.
This is also where her fame shifted into pure commercial icon status. Her universal appeal meant her images were widely merchandised and commodified, a level of cultural saturation rarely achieved by any artist.
Her scenes appeared on Hallmark greeting cards. Sugaring Off was a perennial bestseller, as well as on tiles, fabrics, and advertisements for everything from instant coffee to cameras.
Her art truly permeated American culture, offering that deeply nostalgic, comforting view of a simpler America during the turbulent post-war era and the intense anxiety of the Cold War.
Her scenes were an escape hatch into an idealized past.
And even after all that success and output, her final work remains her most profound statement. We have to spend a moment on the rainbow that she painted in 1961, shortly before her death at 101.
Yes. The rainbow is described by the sources as the ultimate affirmation of life, and in many ways a symbolic self-portrait of an incredibly energetic woman facing the end of her journey.
It's not just a beautiful farm scene. It is deeply packed with symbolism and duality.
It explicitly illustrates the balance she found between the lower earthly world, the world of labor and material reality, and the upper spiritual world of mystery and eternity.
So the lower half is filled with the physical reality of the living. We see farmers laboring in the hayfield, houses, animals, and on the very bottom edge, a small elderly couple.
Right. The man, representing Grandpa, is curved from years of labor, and he has his arm around the woman, Grandma, and she is pointing up toward heaven while he is pointing down to the earth, illustrating their respective journeys.
Wow.
And the rainbow itself is the dominating focus, arsing over the upper half of the canvas. Symbolically, the sources connect it to the ancient Greek idea of a bridge to the heavens and the Old Testament symbol of God among us.
And for Moses, it was explicitly described as a doorway to the world of mystery.
The entire composition centers on this dominating tree that acts as the connector, linking earth and heaven.
And this final, most evocative detail regarding the painting is perhaps the most moving part of her entire legacy.
The hay wagon.
The hay wagon. Emerging from a flowering bush in the foreground, it is interpreted as the chariot that took her into the world beyond. It's an incredibly powerful, peaceful metaphor for her departure, completed right before she died.
It perfectly embodies her own statement about her paintings. I like to paint something that leads me into the unknown, something I want to see, away, and beyond.
It wasn't just about recreating the past. It was about perpetually looking forward, perpetually curious, perpetually learning, even at 101.
That sentiment brings us back to her own self-assessment, which provides the ultimate summary of her fulfillment. In her 1952 autobiography, My Life's History, she wrote one of the most powerful summaries of a life well lived.
And that quote is really the summation of this entire deep dive, the validation of her long journey. She said, "I look back on my life like a good day's work. It was done, and I feel satisfied with it. I was happy and contented, I knew nothing better, and made the best out of what life offered. And life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be."
That is the voice of a person who found profound professional and personal satisfaction, not despite starting her career late, but perhaps because she had the necessary context of a long, hard life to inform her vision and give her subject matter its unique authenticity.
And that profound authenticity leads directly to her modern reevaluation. Recent exhibitions, like the ones at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, are actively working to reposition her in the historical narrative.
They're challenging that early, belittling view of her as merely a quaint, self-taught artist. Instead, the argument now places her in the highest echelons of American art, as a sensitive and vital documentarian of rural America.
And a surprising participant in the construction of American modernism, which often embraced non-academic, primitive forms.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, her life proves undeniably that applied knowledge, even if it's self-taught and late-blooming, is profoundly valuable. She took her innate talent, her deep personal knowledge of rural life, and her previous creative skills honed in fiber arts, simply switched the medium and became a legend.
This deep dive into Grandma Moses is such an essential antidote to that paralyzing anxiety that so many of us feel about our own personal deadlines, time running out. The timeline is just an extraordinary act of defiance.
At age 12, she started laboring. At age 78, she started painting.
At 101, she finished her final, profound work.
And this isn't simply a motivational anecdote. Our source material points to specific neuroscience findings that actually provide the scientific explanation for this late-life potential. They support her success.
Okay, that's fascinating. So if the common perception is that physical dexterity and mental plasticity decline, how does the science explain her ability to paint 1,500 canvases in her last decades? What does that late-life psychological development actually look like?
Well, the gerontologist Gene Cohen spent years researching aging and creative development, and his research demonstrates that as people enter their 80s and beyond, they undergo unforeseen developmental changes.
Okay.
Specifically, changes in the frontal lobe of the brain improve the ability to deal with negative emotions and significantly enhance confidence.
So it's not just that she had time, she also had the courage that comes with all that experience.
Precisely. Cohen described this phenomenon as the emergence of friendly metaphorical inner voices saying, "If not now, when? What can they do to me?"
I love that.
This lessening of self-consciousness, this reduction of anxiety and increase in courage, it creates the perfect psychological climate for pursuing creative endeavors that might have felt intimidating or overly competitive earlier in life.
That makes perfect sense for an artist starting outside the system. She no longer had the time or, the emotional capacity to care about what the formal critics might say. She was painting for her own satisfaction and expression.
And there's also the motor skill side of creativity, which you mentioned earlier. A 2002 Duke University brain imaging study showed a key difference in brain usage between young and older subjects.
Okay, what was it?
Younger people tend to rely predominantly on one side of the brain for specific tasks, the logical left or the intuitive right.
But what happens with age?
Older people, the research showed, begin to use both sides of the brain in a more synchronous, integrated way. Cohen calls this moving to all-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive for the brain. That's a powerful analogy.
It is. Think of it this way. Your logical planning mind and your intuitive creative mind start working together much more smoothly. Any activity that optimally uses both sides of the brain simultaneously, like writing or composing or visual art, is incredibly beneficial.
And the capacity for that deep integration, the all-wheel drive, it actually increases with age.
This is why folk art, which relies so heavily on accumulated life experience, crystallized wisdom, and intuitive, untrained skill, is often dominated by older people. Grandma Moses is the poster child for this scientific reality.
The combination of deep life knowledge, reduced emotional inhibition, and improved brain synchronization provided the ideal conditions for late-life artistic mastery.
Her example is just profoundly encouraging because she didn't just find a quiet hobby. She found world-class professional success and profound personal satisfaction in her 80s, 90s, and 100s. It demonstrates that the pinnacle of professional growth can happen long after you might have assumed the climb was over.
She proved that the foundation built through decades of other kinds of work is not wasted.
It's simply the necessary infrastructure for the unexpected professional life that follows.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Grandma Moses famously said, "I like to paint something that leads me into the unknown, something I want to see away and beyond." And this wasn't just about the idyllic scenery she was painting. It was a metaphor for continuously looking beyond her current reality and embracing the possibility of discovery, even at 101.
We've seen that a life of intense labor delayed her true creative pursuit for 8 decades. Yet when she finally found the right medium, fueled by her lifelong resourcefulness and that late-life boost of courage and wisdom, she found international success and fulfillment that satisfied her completely, defining her life as a good day's work.
The question for you to mull over as you finish your deep dive into this extraordinary life is this. If Anna Mary Robertson Moses, at 78, could decide to ignore decades of societal expectation and launch a world-class professional career that ran for over 20 years, what unknown future are you currently deciding is too late to pursue?